I'm just going to go through the agenda real quick at sort of a high level of what we're going to cover. I want to emphasize that we only have an hour to cover pretty much all of SharePoint administration, so we're absolutely not going to cover all of SharePoint administration in an hour. But I will try to give you a few highlights and some important concepts that you can walk away with. A couple other notes before I jump into this. I wanted to say, I have a few slides, but really most of this is going to be actually going through sites and looking at SharePoint itself. We're going to go into central administration. Actually, we'll start off with a quick infrastructure overview that does have a couple of slides, and then we're going to go into central administration, and I'm going to walk you through certain components of central administration. We'll do a quick introduction to PowerShell, and then we'll talk about some site collection administration concepts and tasks for IT pros. We'll try to answer questions along the way. So if you, like John said, if you have a question, feel free to ask it. But know that we may wait until the end to answer questions, and we'll reserve some time at the end for that. So, so with that, let's get started. I wanted to talk a little bit about the infrastructure, and I know that I don't know the experience level on the webinar, but in SharePoint 2010 and 2007 and earlier versions of SharePoint, we often thought of things in these basic 3 tiers. We had web servers that had SharePoint installed, and they basically served up requests to users. And then in the second tier, we had application servers that also had SharePoint installed and ran service applications like search and user profile services and some of the other service applications. And then in the third tier, we had database servers that did not have SharePoint installed, but instead had SQL Server on them, and they basically stored all the data. In SharePoint 2013, I'd like to propose that we stop thinking of things so much in tiers as layers that stack on top of each other, but instead we have a bunch of different servers that serve different roles. And to illustrate that point, I'm just going to bring up a slide that shows exactly the ports that need to be open between servers for SharePoint to communicate with each other. And it's kind of a giant mess if you think about it. I mean, all these servers are just basically talking to each other. You can see that in this slide that I've got here, this box represents the farm itself. So these are within this box right here are the servers that have SharePoint installed on them. And then outside the box, we've got other different servers that serve different roles. So for example, we've got an Active Directory, DNS, and our SQL servers all right down here. And then we've also got external content and file shares and things like that that may be talking to SharePoint if you've got that set up. And then within SharePoint, we've got things like search, distributed cache, actually 2 different search components here, an application server that's running the user profile service, and a web front end. So in SharePoint 2013, we're actually taking away, or we're kind of evolving into this concept of a lot of the servers talk to each other, but they don't necessarily fall into just a traditional hierarchical or tiered role. So in this diagram, this is actually one from Microsoft. They show us the traditional model is over here on the left-hand side, and at the top we've got the web servers right here. This is the traditional model again. And then we've got all the application servers in the middle and the database servers on the bottom. And we kind of thought of it as tiers where we built upon each other. In SharePoint 2013, what we're saying is instead we've got a bunch of servers that do all sorts of different things, but aren't necessarily to be thought of as being stacked on top of each other. So we've got distributed cache and the request management servers here at the front. These servers actually serve the function of holding data or requests that are requested quite frequently, and they serve it up very, very quickly. They're at the kind of the forefront of where users are accessing the servers. Then we've got our web servers sort of right here, where a lot of the grunt work is of handling requests from users. And then we've got sort of these batch processing and special needs workloads like workflow and Office web applications and maybe a search server. They all kind of serve different components in here. And then we've got finally our databases. So this is it in a very quick nutshell. Just shows how the servers are kind of laid out within SharePoint 2013. And I'm actually going to show you in just a minute here a demo environment where we're going to walk through some of what that looks like. So let's actually do that right now. This is really the end of my slideshow. The rest of it is all going to be, we're just going to go through the servers, central administration, PowerShell, and just do some work. So I'm going to skip out of this here and go to my server. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about my demo environment here. I'm actually running this on Windows Azure, and you can see that I've got 5 different servers, and 2 of them I'm not using at the moment for purposes of this demo. But I have a domain controller. I have an Office web app server that, like I mentioned, I'm not using at the moment. I have my SharePoint web front end, my SQL server, and my workflow server, which I'm also not using. And only the SharePoint server of the ones that we're using has SharePoint installed on it, and that's the one we're going to go into and take a look at. SQL Server has obviously SQL, and then Office Web Apps, or the domain controller, excuse me, it just has Windows Server 2012 installed on it. So we're actually going to go right into this SharePoint server right now and start taking a look. So I'm in my SharePoint server, and the first thing I'm going to do is just show you what's installed on here, and then we can start poking around in central administration. So if I just do a search on SharePoint, you'll see that I've got central administration on here. I've got my SharePoint 2013 management shell. I actually have PowerPivot installed on here, so you'll see that, and if you're not familiar with PowerPivot, it's one of the BI tools for SharePoint. I've got SharePoint Designer installed on here, and then the product configuration wizard. So when you go into central administration, there's actually an icon that you can pin to your taskbar right down here. I don't know. It looks like a little wrench and a hammer. The only thing that really does is it opens up Internet Explorer in administrative mode. So it gives you this prompt, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but it gives you a prompt to say, do you want to run this in administrative mode? You can also access oh, I just got a note that my taskbar isn't showing, so I apologize. I'll make sure and actually let me just switch that real quick. You should be able to see it now. So it looks like a little wrench and a hammer down here. And then when you open up central administration, like I mentioned, it basically opens up Internet Explorer with elevated privileges so that you can see it run as an administrator. One of the things that a lot of people do in the beginning is they navigate directly to the URL, which you can do from IE, but the problem is it's not running in elevated privileges, so you'll see a lot of missing menu items and things like that. So I tend to, when I set up servers, is just pin this little wrench and hammer to the taskbar, and I'm good to go. Now, when you're in central administration, this is the first page that you'll see, and you'll see that it's broken out into these different sections. And as an IT pro or an administrator of SharePoint, you'll spend a lot of time in central administration. You're the farm administrator, and this is one of your main tools for getting the job done, whatever you need to do. But there's an application management section, there's a monitoring section, security, application settings. We've got an apps section if you're using apps in SharePoint 2013, and then there's an upgrade, migration, backup, and restore and system settings. So we're not going to go through all these settings, but I would like to spend some time on the application management section. And if I click on the main heading in application management, there's about there's four other sections. We're going to take a look at manage web applications. So in this particular farm, I have 3 web applications, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that better. I've got a portal web application. This is where all my users go, and you'll see that it gives the URL to the web application right here, as well as what port it's running on. I've got central administration, which is what this is running on right here, as well as my site host, and you can see the URLs and the ports associated with each of those. With each web application, and really in this case I've just got one main user web application, we really only care about this one in terms of the settings. I don't have any my site users, so I'm not going to go into that, but I will cover the portal settings. And I'm just going to go through a little bit about some of the settings along with a web application. It's your responsibility as an IT pro or an administrator of a site to manage the settings that go along with these web applications. And if you click on the menu, the ribbon at the top, you'll see that there's about 6 different sections of settings that you can configure. So we're going to start with the general settings and just kind of go through these. And while we're waiting for that, I want to mention again that this is a really cursory review of the whole central administration. For a much more in-depth, we'll cover that in the training course in a couple of weeks. I'm not going to go through all these, but I do want to mention a couple of things here. There is a maximum number of, there's actually a few configuration settings that determine what your users will affect your users directly. One is the maximum number of alerts that users can create. That's set right here. You can change that, but this is the default setting of 500. You can enable RSS feeds on your sites. This is where you do it. One thing that I often see with people is this browser file handling. If you're working with documents that are not either Office documents or other types of documents stored on SharePoint, sometimes you can be prompted to log in if you try to open it, or prompted to download it when you try to open it. So what we do is you can set this to permissive to allow people to not be prompted to download it when they not be prompted to log in when they try to download a file. Generally, it's recommended to stay strict, but you can set this at permissive, and that's one of the problems that you'll see a lot of times. The other thing I wanted to point out here is, let me just go to the recycle bin. The recycle bin keeps, these are the recycle bin settings. So there's basically 2 layers of recycle bins for SharePoint. And in each case, it's generally set at 30 days. In this case, I've got the default of 30 days. This is always the default when you set up your SharePoint site. And then it says, how much should I actually keep in the second stage recycle bin, which is after items have been deleted or sitting in the recycle bin for 30 days, how much should I keep in the second stage recycle bin? And generally the default is 50%. So what happens is when a user deletes something from a site collection or a site, it goes into the recycle bin. And this is what determines how long it stays there. So in this case, I've got it set at 30 days, so it's going to stay there for 30 days. And then after 30 days, it moves into the second stage recycle bin. And there's no time period set for that. Instead, it's set for a general quota of how big the site is. So I'm going to generally keep about 50% of how much my live site has. So this is where you would set that. And recycle bin comes up a lot as an IT pro. Because you often get requests from users, I deleted something, I lost something, I can't find it. It usually ends up in the recycle bin, and you can restore those things. So this sets your policy for that. The other important setting here in general settings is the maximum upload size for your web application. By default, it's set at about 2 gigabytes. You can change that, although it's not recommended. If anything, you would want to set it a little bit smaller, so you can change that here. So that's about it for what I wanted to cover for the general settings. Feel free to ask any questions if you have any along the way, but I'm going to go into resource throttling. There's actually a few very important settings in here as well. The list view threshold is one of the most important ones. The list view threshold determines how many items are returned in a view on a list. And you, as an IT pro or an admin, will get requests to increase this because people like to see everything in one view, even if it's 10,000 or 20,000 items. I strongly recommend that you do not increase this. There are very detailed reasons as to why this is set at 5,000. So keep this at 5,000 if you can, or even a little bit lower. And then, and if you want to, you can follow up with me separately on Twitter or my blog, and I could talk to you about some of the details of why this is set at 5,000. However, in certain cases, you may have custom code or custom features that where you want to be able to override that. And the example that they mentioned right here is for auditors and for administrators. So there is a separate list view threshold for auditors and administrators of 20,000, and this is generally meant to be like, you know, every 6 months we have the auditors come in and they need to view everything and collect a sample and things like that, so they're able to do that. The list view lookup threshold is another one that's important for the web application. It helps determine how many lookup fields you can have in a single list. And if you're not familiar with lookup fields, basically what they are is they're not actually a field itself. Instead, they're a pointer to a field on another list. A good example of this is managed metadata. Managed metadata fields on a list are actually lookup fields. So you can't, in this environment, the way I've got it set up, you can't create more than 8 lookup fields on a list. So I couldn't add, for example, 10 managed metadata fields to a list. And the reason this is there is because it is very performance or resource intensive to do lookups on multiple different lists from a single list. So I'm going to skip the rest of this. I did want to go through those settings, though, and show you those. So the other thing about web applications that I wanted to point out specifically was user policy. User policy is important because a lot of times you'll see administrators or farm administrators use this as an easy way to give access to the entire web application. And in this particular case, I've demonstrated as an example, I've given myself full control access over the entire web application. What this means is that I can go into any site collection, any web, anywhere on the site, and access the site, regardless of whether or not I've actually been given permissions to the site. The reason you don't want to do this is because every time you open up a list, a view, a page, anything, it's always going to check the security for that page, and it's going to check the policy for the web application. So if you've got 20 or 30 people in here, and you imagine that every single item that's ever been opened on any list is checking all 20 or 30 people on this policy, you don't want to do that. So generally I recommend that you've got a few specific accounts in here, including the search crawl account, the super reader and the super user that manage the object cache, and that's pretty much about it. So I just wanted to mention that that's basically what policy for web application is. Now this is my demo environment, so I can kind of put a few people in there, and including myself, to make things easier on myself. But in a production environment, you generally don't want to do that. All right, so let's check a couple other things in application management. One of the other things I wanted to point out is the service applications. Service applications provide additional functionality for a farm. In this particular case, I've got an on-premises farm running in Azure that has pretty much every service application installed. So you'll see that I've got Power Pivot installed, you know, search and the user profile service and workflow and all that stuff. Well, this is your access point into each of those service applications. So if I wanted to manage search, for example, I would go into the service application menu that I just showed you, click on search, the search service application, and it'll bring me directly to the search management portal, which is also part of central administration. And we're just going to talk briefly about search because it's an important concept with SharePoint. You'll see that this is kind of your dashboard that it brings you to. You can see that my search is running, that I'm not crawling any items because this is a demo environment. There's not much here, but there are 183 items that have been crawled in the past. But I wanted to show you the search topology. The search application topology is interesting. It breaks up different components of the search that allows you to take some of the more resource-intensive aspects of search and put them on separate servers or isolate them in a way that they're not affecting the actual serving up of requests to users. In this case, I've just got one server, so it's all on one server. But if you had multiple servers, you would see them listed out here with different components on different servers. The interesting thing about SharePoint 2013 is that when you set up search, you do it all through PowerShell. There used to be a way where you could manage this topology in SharePoint 2010 and earlier versions through central administration. You can no longer do that anymore. You have to do it through PowerShell. So we are actually going to cover a few different components of PowerShell, more of an intro level here in a few minutes. But I wanted to mention that because this is just an example of how Microsoft and SharePoint in general are pushing us to use some of these PowerShell tools that are actually very easy to use and very robust in their ability to manage the farm. One other thing I wanted to show you about search is the crawling, the content sources. You'll see here that when you set up search, you get a default content source. In this case, it's local SharePoint sites. And right now, it says it's idle, it's not crawling. But the last time it crawled, it took about 6 minutes, which was way back in May. Apparently, I haven't crawled recently. But when you edit this, you'll see that what this content source is I'm telling SharePoint what to crawl. So here, I'm telling it basically to crawl my local farm. And I'm telling it right here to crawl everything under the host name for each start address. So I'm telling it to crawl everything. One of the nice things that was added in SharePoint 2013 was the ability to enable something called continuous crawls. In this farm, I don't have it enabled, but continuous crawls are extremely resource intensive, but they're very beneficial because they make search results active relatively quickly. And when I say relatively quickly, generally it's 5 to 15 minutes. So if you type something new, create a new list item, create a new page on a site, if you have continuous crawl enabled, it will be available in generally about 5 to 15 minutes. Incremental crawls, however, are based on a schedule. So whatever schedule you set, and in this case I don't have a schedule, but whatever schedule you set would determine how often that information is available. In typical environments, I've seen anywhere from daily incremental crawls to every hour or 2 hours. So you can imagine the benefit that continuous crawls do with every 5 to 10 minutes. But again, it is very resource intensive. The nice thing about it, though, is that on the front end, when you think about presenting data to users, Microsoft is really pushing us to use search as a way to expose that data. They've got new web parts and new capabilities that we're not going to go into, but part of that is making sure that the data is there when it's uploaded to the system. And continuous crawl sort of enables that because it's available very quickly. So again, this is how you manage search and just kind of get some information about your crawl activity, how long it takes, and what it's doing, things like that. You always can run a crawl immediately. You can always start a full crawl or an incremental crawl for your search right out of here. So, in our class, we'll go through a lot more detail of what all the different search components are, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of search for this hour webinar. Let's go back to central administration. Now let's create a site collection. So one of the common tasks that you will have as an administrator is to create site collections for departments, or if you're running an intranet, or other users for projects, things like that. So let's go through the process of creating a site collection. First, you have to pick your web application. In this farm environment, we've only got really one web application that we use as a portal. So I'm just going to leave it at that, but you could change it if you have multiple web applications. And I'm going to create a finance site for the finance department. So that'll be its name, is finance. And I'll just put a little description here, finance department site. And here I will say that the URL is going to be site/finance. This is what we call managed paths in SharePoint. Typically, we're starting to move towards host headers as more as a way of doing it, but you can set managed paths here if you want. And in this case, I'll do it that way, and you can say it's finance. And the next thing we do in SharePoint 2010, if you are upgrading from 2010, or excuse me, in SharePoint 2013, if you are upgrading from SharePoint 2010, and you haven't quite yet gotten to the point where you're actually upgrading the look and feel to 2013, you can actually create a new site collection with the look and feel of SharePoint 2010. So that's what this experience version is here for. If you're on 2013 though, and you're already upgraded to the look and feel of 2013, which in this case my farm is, I would just select 2013. And then I would select a template for my site. And in this case, the default a lot of people choose from is team site, so I'm going to select a team site. But there are other different sites you could select, including community sites, different enterprise sites if you've got the enterprise version, as well as publishing sites. So I'm just going to select a team site. In this interface, you can select 2 different users to be the site collection administrators. And I don't know how this is done, excuse me. I don't know how this is done in your organization, but typically what I see in most organizations is that someone from IT is actually the site collection administrator, and that is different than the site owner, who the owner has full control over the web and the sites underneath it, but the site collection administrator actually has a few other capabilities that the site owner doesn't have. And typically these are the IT, someone from IT manages the site collection. Oops. So I'm just going to put myself here. Note that you can only put 2 here, but after you've created the site, you can add more if you want. And then you would select quota template. If you have quota template set up as part of your governance strategy, you would select it here. I recommend that in most cases you do want to set up a quota template and make sure that there's a storage limit attached to it, so that it doesn't get too, so that you're able to more effectively manage your sites and the content databases and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. It may take a minute or 2 to create, so it'll spin here. And in the meantime, I'll just check the questions. I don't see any questions, so that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Central Administration. The other thing I wanted to show you is content databases. We're not going to go into SQL Server at all, but you'll see in this case I've just got one content database. It's called SP Content Portal. If you're not familiar with the concept of a content database, what it does is it contains all the data for site collections. So in this case, I've got 7 site collections. Let me just zoom in on this a little bit. I've got 7 site collections in this particular content database. It is not in read-only mode, and I've got a couple of warnings set up here just to let me know when it gets to start to get too big and maybe I need to create another content database. Each content database is associated with a particular web application, so you can see that in this case, SP Content Portal is associated with my portal web application, ST01, and it contains all of my content databases. It's really important to manage your content databases effectively in terms of how big they get and how many site collections you're storing in them. So what I'm going to do is just show you how to create a new content database. And again, these should be created within SharePoint so that SharePoint can set them up appropriately. So in this case, I'm associated with it with my portal content database, and I'm selecting my database server and specifying a name for the database. I'm just going to use Windows authentication for the database and go ahead and say OK. Now, one thing you should note is that when you create a new site collection, SharePoint picks which content database it's going to go into for that web application if you've got more than one. You don't have necessarily an out-of-the-box easy way to control that, but there is a way to control which content databases new site collections go into. And I'll show you that here. So, but before we do that, let's just go back. Our finance site was created. And if I clicked on it, you'll see that it'll take me to the new finance website. So if I go back to the content databases, apologize for all the clicking here. Oops, clicked on the wrong thing. Manage content databases. You'll see that I still got the one. It's still creating the other one. But the way SharePoint decides what sites go into which content databases is from these site collection level warnings and maximum number of site collections. So I just created a new content database. If I want all SharePoint sites going forward to go into that new content database rather than this old one, all I have to do is go into the old one and set this to something like, you know, there's 7 in there now, so set it to like 9 and 10. And now any new sites will automatically go into the new content database because the new content database has a higher level on the maximum number of site collections. So that's actually how SharePoint decides what site collection or what content databases it should go into, is kind of round robin based on the maximum number of site collections in the content database. Okay, so we've gone through application management sort of rather quickly at a very high level. Let's take a look at some PowerShell. So this is just going to be very much an introduction to PowerShell. And I apologize, I can't really make this much bigger, so hopefully you guys are able to zoom in and see this okay. But what I'm going to do is just get you familiar at a very basic level with some of the commands in PowerShell. And because I'm terrible at typing, I've already written out the commands so that you guys don't have to watch me try and type bad. The neat thing about PowerShell is that it's got a very intuitive way of selecting of the way its commands are named. One way, in this case, I'm just using the get command. They're always verb noun. So in this case, the verb is get and the noun is command. So I'm just going to hit enter here. This is a PowerShell command that will get all the commands that are available to me. And you'll see that there's a lot. I mean, it just spins through tons and tons of commandlets that are available to me. The thing about PowerShell, though, too, is you can also, it usually includes a bunch of parameters that you can add to the end of a command. In this case, I'm going to add one parameter. Parameters are denoted by a dash, and then the name of the parameter, and then the parameter value. So in this case, I'm saying get command, and the command that I want to get is called add PS snap-in. So if I hit enter there, it gets me the command called add PS snap-in. You can also use wildcards in your searches. So if you're doing something like, let's say I want to get all the commands that started with the word Windows, I can put asterisks in there, and it would find all the commands that contain the word Windows. So if I just hit enter, you'll see that it pops up a bunch of commands that I can use. But before we get too in love with its simplicity, let's take a look at some of a little bit more. We'll gradually get more complex, actually very quickly get more complex here, just to give you some illustration of what you're able to do. So in this case, I'm going to take the get command property, or get command, and I'm going to do something called pipe. Pipe is where it takes the results of the command and pushes them into another command. So in this case, I'm saying get all the commands, and for each command that I get, do this other thing. And in this case, the other thing is I'm going to say, is it equal to get host? Is the property name equal to get host? And notice that the equal is a dash and then an EQ. In PowerShell, equal is, that's how you write a comparison value. And you can also write greater than or less than, but it's kind of the same concept. Greater than would be GT and less than would be LT. So I'm taking the object that's passed from the get command, and I'm saying if its name is equal to get host, write it out. So it's going to search through all the commands, and notice how that takes a little bit longer because it's actually searching through all the commands and returning the one called get host. Okay, again, these are some really quick basics of PowerShell, but we're going to go through some more advanced stuff here in a second. So and the other thing you'll notice about PowerShell is that a lot of times you can write, take shortcuts in how you write the thing. So this command right here is the exact same command as the one above it. So instead of writing where object, I just wrote where. And instead of writing property name equals get host, I just used this shorthand notation, which contains a $ and then underscore dot name. So the $ and underscore is the object being passed into it, and the dot name means the name property. So in this case, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm just using shorthand notation. And so I get the same result. And with PowerShell 3.0, you can also do this where you say get command where name equal, where, this is why I didn't want you to have to see me type, but I just thought of this, where name equals get host. I believe this is how you do it. Oh, guess not. Well, there's another shorthand just so you can see in PowerShell 3.0. But the nice thing is you can do a lot of very complex stuff with this. So in this case, I'm going to show you how to start doing some SharePoint stuff. So let's get a site object. So SharePoint has a bunch of built-in commandlets as well. And in this case, I'm going to get a site. And in this case, I can get our new finance site. So it's verb get, and SP site is the noun. And I'm giving it the URL of the site I want to get. So that returns just some basic information about the site. But if I wanted to, I could also assign it to a variable. And variables always start with the $, and the assignment value is an equal sign. So I'm going to say get SP site and assign it to this site variable. And that doesn't return anything, but then if I just type in the name of the variable, it'll return the exact same thing as what I did before, of what we saw before. So now the site object is contained in the site variable. So the nice thing about it is that you can then use this command called getMember to see what you can do with that site. So if I type getMember and then pipe that into site, oops, got a slight error there. I wrote it backwards. I can see everything that I can do with this site object. So one thing, for example, you'll see here's URL. There's a property on a site object called URL. So if I just wanted to get the URL property, I would just type site.url, and it would give me the URL of the site. I could show solutions that are associated with that site. I could see the root web, the schema version. I mean, you can do virtually anything you want here with the site. You can also see who the owner is, whether it needs upgrade, all kinds of different stuff. There's also a bunch of methods associated with the site object. I could get recycle bin items if there are any. So if I wanted to get recycle bin items, I would just say site.get recycle bin items. Oh, and it takes an input parameter, so I don't have that there. But you would just type that in. We're running a little bit low on time, but I did want to show another thing here with PowerShell. You can also use the IDE in PowerShell. This comes with SharePoint. So this is, or the ISE, excuse me. This ISE gives you a little bit more intuitive interface for running PowerShell commands. In this case, I opened up the ISE, and I run this command called add PS snap-in, and I just say import all the Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell commands. And then what I did here is I created a little function, get webs insight. And I made this up. This is a name that I created. I tried to follow the naming convention of verb, noun, and it takes this function, it takes one parameter called site. And then it does a little loop for each web, and this is a variable in site.allWebs. So this gets all the webs in the site, and for each one it just says, it writes out to the host, which is the window below. It says found, and then the web.url. And then right below it, so this function creates the function and stores it, and then right below it, I run the function. So if I just run this right now, it's going to get all the webs associated with this site, and you'll see them right here. So found, SPO1, sites, projects, and then I've got an app stored in that web, as well as a team site. Okay. So, I apparently messed that up. There we go. Get a clean look there. All right, so the last thing we're going to cover before we, again, this is a very cursory overview of PowerShell, but the last thing we're going to cover before we get into an opportunity to ask questions is we're just going to take a look at site administration. It's important as an IT pro or an administrator to understand your responsibilities with site collection administration if you are the site collection administrator. So I'm just going to go into our newly created finance site, and there's a little gear up here on the right, and I'm going to click on Site Settings. Site Settings is kind of the home base for where you administer the site. Notice that there's a section right here called Site Collection Administration. This is essentially the difference between an owner. This is one of the differences between an owner and a site collection administrator. A site collection administrator sees this, an owner does not. Okay? So you'll notice that the site collection administrator has access to the recycle bin. And since we just created this site, there's nothing in it. But one of your duties as a site collection administrator is to help manage this recycle bin for people that are that may have deleted something from their site that they didn't mean to. In most cases, the user can manage it themselves, but if it gets deleted from the end user recycle bin, you can always go to the second recycle bin, which only you have access to restore the item. So it's very common that somebody deletes something, forgets about it for a while, goes back and says, where did that go? You can usually, for a certain period of time, restore it even if it's been deleted from the end user recycle bin. So let's go back to site settings. And you can also manage some search stuff here. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail right now, but just know that there are some site collection level settings for search that you can manage as a site collection administrator. An important thing to note as a site collection administrator, though, is the site collection features option. This enables features on the site that this basically determines what features are available on the site collection. So for example, a common feature that people use on site collections is, I'm just going to scroll down here, sorry for getting a little dizzy, is the SharePoint server publishing infrastructure right here. You'll notice that this is not activated on this site, and if somebody wanted to try to use it, they wouldn't be able to. But as a site collection administrator, I can say, okay, you can use it on this site and just activate it. Okay, so I can click activate there. So one of your other jobs is to make sure that the departments or the sites that people are using have the features that they need activated and available. In this case, I've also got this custom feature down here called Share Text feature, something that I've installed in the past. So if I wanted to, I could go in and enable my custom Share Text feature 1 right here specifically for this site. Okay, there's one last thing, and then we're going to try to get to a few questions that have come in that I want to show you. If you go to Site Settings, the other important thing as a site collection administrator is you have this line item right here as well to determine who else can be a site collection administrator. So right now it's just me, but if I wanted to allow other people to be site collection administrators, this is where I would do it. Site owners cannot do this. Only site collection administrators can assign this responsibility. And you noted that when we created this site collection, we assigned a site collection administrator, me, and here I am, I'm showing up here. I can assign as many people as I want here, but they all have to be actual people, not groups. And then you also have all the normal capabilities that an owner has, but generally as an IT pro, if it's not your site, there's only a few things that you need to do, and that's typically control who the site collection administrators are, manage the recycle bin. If there are any search settings or audit logs or things like that that you want to manage, you would do that. But also enable the features that you want to give people the capability to use on the site collection. Okay, good. So I'm going to just try to go through a couple questions, and feel free to ask any more if you guys want to type them into the chat. The first one is, can I install SharePoint 2013 bits on my admin desktop so that I can run PowerShell remotely and not log into the servers? You can actually run PowerShell remotely without SharePoint 2013 bits. And I'll show you, I actually wrote a whole blog on that. So let me just, I'll actually put it into the chat here in a second. But if you want to run PowerShell remotely without having to log into the servers, you do not have to install SharePoint. There are a few configuration steps you have to take, however, and that is all outlined on my blog, which I'll post in the chat here in just a second. I'm just grabbing it. All right, what other questions do we have? In our company, we have IT set up as site collection admins. In 2013, the audit information is under site collection administration. How can we give site owners access to the audit stuff? You can't. You can't give them direct access to the audit stuff. You can give them access to the audit log reports by just exporting them and sending them to them. And then someone asked about contacting me. Let me just, before we wrap up here, and we're going to wrap up in just a second, why don't I put my contact information up here one more time. But I'll just mention, don't forget, we have this class where we're going to cover this all in detail for 2 days, a lot more depth than we've covered here. We really did kind of an overview here. And if you're curious about what we're going to cover, this is all the stuff we're going to cover in those 2 days. And we're going to do labs, so everyone will be actually doing the stuff that we cover. So feel free to register for that. But let me put my contact information back up here. You can send me an email as well, and I'll just type that into the chat. So give me 1 second here so I can type this into the chat. So my email is doug.hemminger@protiviti.com. doug.hemminger@protiviti.com. And I'm just going to put in also the URL to remotely run PowerShell to manage SharePoint. So this was actually written for SharePoint 2010, but most of the same, I mean, it pretty much the same applies to SharePoint 2013 as well. All right, any other questions? Or I don't see any other questions coming in. So I want to thank everyone for your time. I appreciate it, and enjoy your day.